As you know, coronavirus cases and hospitalizations are spiking, and that is happening across the nation as states continue to struggle to combat COVID-19. Yet President Trump and White House officials appear to be focusing on discrediting Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert, a doctor that President George W. Bush once called his hero. This comes as Dr. Fauci speaks out about the pandemic's growing threats. Trade advisor Peter Navarro tells CBS News Dr. Fauci has a good bedside manner with the public, but he has been wrong about everything I have ever interacted with him on. That is the well-known doctor. Oh, no, he's not a doctor, Peter Navarro. He's a economic analyst. So we're going to talk to Weijia Jiang about this. But Anne-Marie, it strikes me as interesting that now the president of the United States, and I want to talk to Weijia about, oh, there is Weijia. We weren't sure if we had Weijia. Yeah. Weijia is following all the developments from the White House. And Weijia, I was going to ask you about targeting Dr. Fauci and the president of the United States retweeting the former host of Love Connection as some kind of an expert, as opposed to Dr. Fauci, as these coronavirus cases and hospitalizations surge across the country. You know, we ask you every time we have you on, Weijia, what is the strategy here? I'll ask it again, but it appears that they don't have one.
Well, in recent days especially, Dr. Fauci has been increasingly more blunt about how the U.S. is handling coronavirus and the fact that it is not under control, issuing warnings that more has to be done because this really could get worse. And that is not what President Trump wants to hear. That is not the message that he has been sending, which is that the virus will somehow magically disappear. And in his most recent interview saying that in 2, 3, or 4 weeks, we will be in, quote, good shape. Well, Fauci says we are not in good shape. And when you compare us to other countries, especially, you can see that we're not doing great. And certainly the two have publicly disagreed in the past. But what's so stunning this time around is that you have other administration officials, including Peter Navarro, who you mentioned, with not so subtle shade, Vlad, I have to say, although it came with a great point that he is not a medical doctor. Anyway, Peter Navarro, for example, slamming Dr. Fauci in a way that makes it look like, you know, Fauci is a political rival in some ways, instead of, you know, someone who, you know, when you look at what he's saying, is just trying to present the facts as the nation's top infectious disease doctor. And so I think that, you know, they're clearly trying to discredit Dr. Fauci. Our reporting shows that there are also some members of the task force that are frustrated because, you know, as he, you know, gets more of the spotlight, he drums up more controversy, they feel that their work is being overshadowed because everyone's talking about this ongoing feud between Fauci and the president.
You know, and I just want to sort of say, and Vlad, you know, you kind of underlined this. Dr. Fauci has perhaps remained the most sort of direct and honest about this disease to the American public, this virus to the American public. And the truth of the virus is that we're getting more information literally weekly about it. So as we learn more, then we adjust our approach. That's not getting things wrong. That's learning more, using the science to make better decisions. It's not a matter of right and wrong, which is the way that the administration seems to be characterizing it. But to that point, Weijia, you know, I remember just a few days ago, I think the president, one of the ways in which he pointed out Dr. Fauci got it wrong is that in the early days, Dr. Fauci was telling people not to worry about masks, primarily because there was a mask shortage and the first responders really needed them. So he didn't want the general public going out there and buying up all the masks. And then later on, he said masks are a good idea, which is what he's saying right now, along with every other medical expert. And it looks like perhaps the president is getting on board, because for the first time in public, we saw him wear a mask, at least at one of his stops. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so over the weekend, President Trump visited Walter Reed Hospital, and he said that he has never been against masks, and he believes there's a time and place for them. And he thought that this was the right time to wear one because he mentioned soldiers specifically. He mentioned people were, coming off the operating table, and he thought it was appropriate to wear a mask inside a hospital. Of course, his own health experts were all over the television screens yesterday urging people to wear masks, not only in hospitals, but anytime they are in public, because they say, we really won't be able to get control of the spread of the virus until people start using this very simple mitigation measure. And the president's critics have said it is so simple. So what has taken him so long to lead by example? Because it's not only about the president's immediate surroundings, it's about what people at home are seeing. And we've even heard from some of his supporters say, hey, if the president's not doing it, why should I have to? And so it has become a political flashpoint and unfortunately has led to the spread of the virus that we've seen, especially in recent weeks, because I think it's difficult at this point, I always say, to put the toothpaste back in the tube. If somebody has already adopted their belief about a certain behavior, even if health officials come out now, months later, and urge people to change their behavior, I think it's really difficult, not only with regard to masks, but in general, when we already have a habit, it's hard to break that habit. And if your habit is not covering your face, that could be potentially dangerous.
Yeah, and let's just there's one other point I think that we should stress here before we switch gears, Weijia, which is that this White House views any information that comes out from another individual as somehow an attack, either directly on the President of the United States or an attack on his supporters, or in other words, everything comes down to politics. And it is just in the same way that I said Peter Navarro is not a doctor, Anthony Fauci is not an economist, nor is he an education specialist. He's not saying these things because he wants the wheels to fall off the economy or he doesn't want kids to go back to school. He is saying them because he is trying to protect the lives of American citizens. And if people go back to the way that they behaved before this pandemic, such as you saw in Florida, such as you've seen in the past in Texas, Arizona, where they're now seeing a tremendous spike in the number of infections, the wheels will fall off the economy anyway. If there's nobody there to work because they're in the hospitals or because they're bedridden or because tragically they lose their lives, you are looking at a major economic crisis. So the president can suggest that Dr. Fauci doesn't know what he's talking about. He's only talking about infections and COVID-19. This notion that everything is political sometimes seems to be what the messaging from the White House is. I just wanted to make that point before I switch gears, Weijia, to ask you about this fallout over President Trump's decision to commute the prison sentence of Roger Stone, his longtime ally. Stone was convicted, as you know, of various charges related to the Russia probe. What are you hearing, Weijia, about folks close to the president who counseled him to not commute the sentence of Roger Stone because they perhaps saw it as politically charged and perhaps not the best decision for a president who had already been, the president was impeached for corruption charges that the Democrats made. So there may have been some folks who told him this may not be a good look.
Well, look, it's not just people who are advising the president. It's his own attorney general, William Barr, who just days before the president made this decision came out and said during an interview that he thought the sentence for Roger Stone was a fair one. And so when the president decides to commute the sentence, it's really a slap in the face for his own Department of Justice, for the prosecutors, investigators who worked on this case, and really, a criticism of his own federal law enforcement agencies. And ironically, he's also out here urging the public to trust police and to trust law enforcement when he himself is undermining their jobs. And so I think you see Republicans coming out. They're also calling this a mistake. You have Utah Senator Mitt Romney describing it as historic corruption. Of course, it's notable that Romney and the president are not exactly friends. They have a long history of being, political enemies. enemies, but still, others would agree that this is certainly an unprecedented because of the lengthy friendship that the president has had with Stone over the course of several decades. And so, he still has to answer to this and about why he undermined his own Department of Justice. But certainly people are talking about it here in Washington, and it could really brew up, as we start heading into the shorter road to the election, because critics say it's just another example that the president does favors for his friends and allies, even if it means something as dramatic as this.
So still on this topic, former special counsel Robert Mueller wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, and he said essentially, look, Roger Stone remains a convicted felon, as he should be. I'm wondering if we are getting any reaction from Washington to this op-ed. Lindsey Graham apparently suggests that perhaps Mueller may be called to testify at some point.
Right. So Senator Graham says that he is simply fulfilling a request by the Democrats to have Mueller come to Capitol Hill and testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee. He pushed back on reports that this move was an effort to put some space between him and President Trump. Of course, we know that Graham is typically a staunch ally of the president, one of his fiercest defenders, at least in public. But I think this is yet another example of perhaps a turn away from the president when it comes to this decision, because everything happened in step. I mean, this was a long case. There was plenty of evidence to convict Roger Stone, and so to commute his sentence really, I think, offended a lot of people, including Republican lawmakers. Some are not saying it as publicly as others, but it will be interesting to finally hear from Mueller, who broke his silence in this op-ed and made clear, that all the work that his team did has now been insulted.
All right, Weijia, thank you so much.
Sure.